Welcome to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, February 2, 2026. If you are joining us today, I hope you have your thinking cap on because we are about to open up the hood of the human machine.
We really are.
And I don't just mean the heart or the muscles or, the spine. I mean the actual control center. We are going straight into the gray matter.
We certainly are. And not just any gray matter. We are zooming in on a very specific, often misunderstood, and I would say arguably one of the most critical strips of tissue in the entire nervous system.
Wow.
I like to think of it as the neurological crossroads of the human experience.
That is a massive claim. But I have to say, looking at the stack of research you have brought in today, and I mean, this is a heavy stack. I think we can back it up.
I think so.
We are talking about the ventral anterior cingulate cortex, or the VACC. Now, to the uninitiated or even to, the casual biology student, anterior cingulate might just sound like another label on a brain diagram.
Just another term to memorize for a test.
Exactly. But based on these papers, it seems to be acting as the brain's emotional accountant and also its social engine.
Emotional accountant is the perfect way to frame it. I mean, think about what an accountant does. They don't just stare at money.
Right.
They track value. They look at costs. They look at benefits. They look at the history, the ledger, and they make a determination about the bottom line. The VACC is doing exactly that.
But with feelings.
But instead of dollars and cents, it is tallying up social value, emotional weight, and how our internal biological feelings map onto the complex external world.
So our mission today is pretty clear then. We need to unpack the structure and the function of the VACC. We need to figure out where it starts and where it ends.
Boundaries, yeah.
We need to distinguish it from its noisy neighbors.
Yeah.
Because in the brain, just like in real estate, location is everything. And ultimately, we need to explore how this specific piece of wetware helps us learn about ourselves and, crucially, about other people.
Correct. And I want to set the stage for you right now. We are going to be rigorous today. This isn't pop psychology. We aren't just going to talk about vibes or feelings in a vague sense.
No fluff today.
No fluff. We have a stack of heavy-hitting research here. We are looking at cytoarchitecture, which is the cellular structure, all the way to computational modeling of social decision-making.
So we're going from the microscopic to the abstract.
Absolutely. We will be quoting specific papers, authors' dates. We need to ground every claim we make because the cingulate cortex is, historically, a minefield of conflicting terminologies.
Oh.
If we aren't precise with our sources, we're going to get lost in the weeds very, very quickly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the visual. I want you to picture this. If you could crack open a skull, and please don't do this at home, and look at the medial surface of the brain, the flat side between the two hemispheres, what are we looking for?
Well, you start with the name.
Cingulate.
Okay.
Which comes from the Latin for belt or girdle, right?
Exactly. Cingulum. It is a belt. It wraps around the corpus callosum. Now, the corpus callosum is that thick, white bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres.
It's the superhighway between the two sides.
It's the main bridge, yeah. The cingulate cortex hugs that bridge. But to understand where the ventral anterior cingulate cortex is, you have to find the knee.
The knee of the brain. I love that neuroanatomy uses body parts to describe other body parts.
It keeps it relatable. In neuroanatomy, we call it the genu, G-E-N-U. It is the sharp bend at the very front of the corpus callosum. Everything in the cingulate cortex is defined by where it sits relative to this knee.
Okay, so we have the C shape of the cingulate. We have the knee at the very front. Where are we looking for our target, the VACC?
We are looking at the anterior or front section, but specifically the ventral part. Ventral comes from the Latin for belly.
The underbelly.
So we are looking at the tissue that wraps under the knee, and just in front of it, it's the underbelly of the belt, so to speak.
And this isn't just one uniform blob of tissue, right? Looking at the literature, specifically the work by Brent VACC, it seems like we have to slice this up pretty finely to understand what's going on.
We do, and that distinction is absolutely critical. We are relying heavily on the work of Brent VACC here. He is essentially the cartographer of the cingulate.
He drew the map.
He drew the map. In his 2009 book, Cingulate Neurobiology and Disease, specifically the chapter on regions and subregions, VACC lays down the law on this. He argues that the cingulate is not a uniform thing.
It's not a monolith. You can't just say the cingulate does X.
Far from it. No. It has distinct territories with distinct functions. VACC divides the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, into specific subregions. You have the subgenual ACC or SACC.
So sub meaning below.
Exactly, tucked right below the knee. And you have the pregenual ACC, or PACC, which is located directly in front of the knee.
And when we talk about the ventral ACC in this deep dive, we're generally grouping these under and front areas together.
Precisely. And in a later chapter from 2019, he reinforces this. The reason we group them, and the reason the location matters so much, well, it dictates the function.
How so?
Being ventral, being at the bottom, places this region physically closer to the limbic system.
The limbic system being the emotional engine room, the basement where the boiler is.
Right. The amygdala, the hypothalamus, the nucleus accumbens. The VACC is the next-door neighbor to these ancient, powerful emotional centers.
Okay.
Now, contrast that with the dorsal ACC, the top part, which sits closer to the motor cortex and the prefrontal cognitive areas.
Location is destiny in the brain.
It absolutely is.
So the VACC is the downstairs neighbor, kind of dealing with all the noise from the emotional basement, while the dorsal ACC is upstairs trying to get work done, maybe, I don't know, filing taxes or planning a route.
That is a simplification, but it's an accurate one to start with. The VACC is physically positioned to listen to the body and the emotions. The dorsal areas are positioned to act on the world.
Let's get into the wiring diagram then. We've established where it is. Now, what is it made of? You mentioned cytoarchitecture earlier. That sounds like we're looking at the cellular blueprints.
Yes. Cytoarchitecture is the study of the cellular composition of the brain tissue. And if you look at a paper by VACC and Paxinos from 2014, it's called Cytoarchitecture of Mouse and Rat Cingulate Cortex with Human Homologies.
Okay.
Published in Brain Structure and Function, they describe the VACC in a very specific way. They call it a granular or dysgranular.
The granular, meaning without granules, without grains.
Meaning it lacks a well-defined layer 4.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why should I, or anyone listening, care about layer 4? What does a granule do?
Well, the cortex is generally made up of 6 layers. Layer 4 is the main input layer in sensory parts of the brain. If you look at the visual cortex, the part at the back of your head that processes what your eyes see, layer 4 is huge.
It's thick.
It's very thick. Why? Because it is receiving high fidelity, pixel-perfect visual data from the thalamus.
So a thick layer HA means you are a camera. You are taking in raw, detailed data from the outside world.
Exactly. The fact that the VACC is a granular, that it doesn't have this prominent granular layer, tells us it isn't a primary sensory processor.
It's not a camera.
It is not a camera. It is structurally more primitive.
Yeah, primitive usually sounds like an insult in evolutionary terms, like it's outdated or not as good.
Not here. In this context, primitive means foundational. It implies that this region is designed for integration, not just reception. It's more primitive, structurally speaking, but that actually makes it more powerful for mixing signals.
Ah, so it's not a camera, it's a mixer board.
That's a great analogy. It's taking different audio tracks and blending them. And to back that up, we can look at a study referenced in a 2020 paper by Turo Toglu, which cites Palomero Gallagher from 2008.
Right.
The paper is Cytology and Receptor Architecture of Human Anterior Cingulate Cortex. They map the receptors in this area, the chemical docking ports on the cells.
And what do they find on the mixer board? What kind of ports does it have?
They found a really high density of receptors, specifically tuned for regulating internal states.
Internal states. So how the body feels on the inside, my heart rate, my gut.
Yes. Things like arousal, autonomic function, the feeling of being alive. But to regulate that, it needs to talk to everyone. The VACC is what we call a rich club hub.
I love that term, the rich club. It sounds exclusive. You have to pay dues to get in?
Well, in network theory, it just means the rich get richer. The highly connected nodes in a network tend to connect to other highly connected nodes.
Ah, okay.
And the VACC is a massive socialite in the brain's network. We can look at a comprehensive review by Edmund Rolls from 2019 called The Cingulate Cortex and Limbic Systems for Emotion, Action, and Memory. Rolls details exactly who the VACC is talking to.
That's who's on the speed dial.
First and foremost, the amygdala.
The alarm bell. The fear center.
An interface for fight or flight, yeah.
Yeah.
The VACC has strong bidirectional connections with the amygdala. That bidirectional part is key. It means it listens to the amygdala's fear signals, but it also talks back to them. It can regulate them.
So it can turn down the volume on the alarm.
Ideally, yes. It's the part of the brain that says, okay, I hear the alarm, but let's take a breath and assess if this is actually dangerous.
Got it. Okay. Who's second on the list?
The orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC.
And what does the OFC bring to the party?
Value. Rolls notes, and I'll quote here, the ACC receives strong inputs from the orbitofrontal cortex. The ACC is also characterized by connections with the amygdala. The OFC provides value data.
What do you mean by value?
Is this good for me? Is this reward valuable? Is that donut delicious? Is that smile I just saw genuine or fake?
Okay, so we have fear from the amygdala, value from the OFC. Who else is in this club?
Memory. The VACC connects to the perihippocampal gyrus and the ventral hippocampus.
This is crucial. This is what links the emotion to the timeline to context.
It links emotion to memory, exactly. It gives context to the feeling. I feel fear, and I remember that the last time I was in this situation, something bad happened. Or I feel joy, and this reminds me of a happy memory.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture, the VACC is taking the raw primal emotion from the amygdala.
Right.
The calculated value from the OFC, and the historical context from the hippocampus, and it's mixing them all together as a granular, primitive but sophisticated strip of cortex.
Precisely. It integrates complex sensory, cognitive, and emotional information. There's a great paper by Burgos Robles and his colleagues from 2019. It's titled Conserved Features of Anterior Cingulate Networks Support Observational Learning Across Species.
Okay.
You have this beautiful connectivity diagram. It's figure 2 in their source. And it shows that layer 5 of the ACC connects directly to the ventral hippocampus for cognition and to the midline thalamus for affect and arousal.
So physically, biologically, it is wired to be the bridge. It's the translator between the feeling body and the thinking mind.
It is the bridge. And speaking of special wiring, we absolutely cannot talk about the VACC without mentioning a very specific, very elite type of cell found here.
Which is?
The von Economo neurons.
Ah, the celebrity cells of neuroscience. You hear about these a lot.
They really are. A paper by Chen and others in 2021, The Emerging Science of Interoception, published in Trends in Neurosciences, highlights these. They note that human von Economo neurons express transcription factors associated with layer V subcerebral projection neurons.
That is a mouthful. What makes them so special other than the cool name?
They are huge. They're enormous for neurons. And they're spindle-shaped, which is very different from the classic pyramidal shape of most neurons in the cortex.
And their size means?
It means they conduct signals incredibly fast.
Speed. Why do we need speed in the emotional center? I usually think of emotions as slow, lingering things, not something that needs a race car.
Think about social intuition. Think about how fast you have to read a room. If you crack a joke at a party and it lands flat, how quickly do you know?
Instantly. It's a visceral feeling, like a stomach drop.
That speed, that instant gut feeling, is likely facilitated by von Economo neurons. Interestingly, they are found very densely in the anterior cingulate and the insula.
And not in many animals, right?
Only in animals with complex social structures. Humans, great apes, whales, elephants.
Social animals. So these are the social awareness neurons, the fast track for social cues.
That is the leading hypothesis, yes. They allow for the rapid integration of emotional and social information. If you need to read a social hierarchy or feel a pang of guilt the moment you say something wrong, that speed is critical for survival in a group. You can't analyze social cues with a slow processor. You need a fast connection.
That connects perfectly to the next section. We have the structure, we have the wiring, we have the super fast social neurons. Now let's talk about the function, and specifically this great divide between emotion and cognition.
This is a classic debate in the field, yeah. For a long time, people wanted to separate thinking and feeling into totally different boxes in the brain.
And we mentioned earlier that upstairs-downstairs dynamic between the dorsal and ventral ACC. Let's dig into that. I like the Tale of Two Cities analogy for it.
It works well. There's a meta-analysis from 2014 by Raj and his team titled A Meta-Analysis of the Anterior Cingulate Contribution to Social Pain. It was in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience.
And what did they find?
They state it very clearly, and I'll just quote them. Neuroimaging studies reliably reported the involvement of DACC in high cognitive demands, whereas VACC was more specifically related in emotion processing.
So DACC, the dorsal top part, is the stern school teacher with a red pen.
Think of the DACC as the conflict monitor. It lights up when you make an error. It detects a mismatch between what you wanted to do and what you actually did. Oops, I typed a typo. Oops, I missed the exit on the highway. That's the DACC.
It's the correction needed signal.
Precisely. And the VACC. The VACC is the signal that says this feels bad or this feels good. It assesses the emotional weight of that information.
So the DACC says you made a mistake and the VACC says you should feel bad about it.
Or good. Maybe the mistake led to a happy accident. The VACC is the affective, the emotional subdivision. This distinction is supported by earlier work, too, like Bush et al., from 2000, which is a classic paper in the field.
Here is where it gets really interesting for me. The concept of social pain. We use physical words to describe social rejection all the time. She broke my heart. It was a slap in the face. I'm crushed. Is that just poetry or is it biology?
It appears to be biology, and the VACC is central to this. That Roch 2014 meta-analysis was specifically looking at this question. Does social pain overlap with physical pain in the brain?
And does it if someone breaks up with you? Does it hurt like a broken arm?
It does, but with a critical nuance. The study found that while the DACC is involved in the distress component of physical pain, that general something is wrong, fix it signal, the VACC is specifically recruited during the emotional processing of social distress.
So when you get rejected, the VACC is the part of the brain that makes it feel like actual suffering.
Exactly. It's the suffering component. But we have to be careful not to oversimplify this. There is another paper by Wager and his colleagues from 2016, Pain in the ACC, which is cited in later reviews like the Tortiglue paper.
A counterpoint.
A bit, yes. Wager argues that the DACC is also very much involved in pain processing. It's not a perfectly clean split, but the general consensus seems to lean toward the VACC being distinctively tied to the value we place on the social interaction.
It hurts because it matters.
Precisely. Think about it. If a stranger bumps into you on the subway, it's physical contact, maybe a little bit of minor pain. Your DACC might register the impact and the error in your path. But does it hurt your feelings?
No, I'm just annoyed. I move on.
Right. Now imagine your partner pushes you away when you try to hug them. The physical sensation might be less than the subway bump, but the VACC lights up like a Christmas tree. Why?
Because the social value of that rejection is catastrophic to my internal model of safety and connection.
That's it. The VACC is deciding this input matters to my survival as a social being, and therefore it must cause pain.
And this ties into interoception, right? That word keeps popping up in the Chen 2021 paper.
Yes, exactly. Interoception.
It's like a sixth sense, right?
In a way, it's the sense of the internal state of the body. Are you hungry? Is your heart racing? Do you feel heavy or light? Chen's team argues that the anterior cingulate, along with the insula, is the key integration center for these signals.
It's the body's dashboard.
It's the dashboard that tells you how I feel. And importantly, Chen notes that the, quote, anterior cingulate cortex provides the neural substrates for feedback-driven iteration of decision and value.
That's a fancy way of saying.
It uses that gut feeling to drive future decisions.
Yeah.
It takes the data from the dashboard and adjusts your steering.
So trust your gut is actually trust your VACC and insula integration loop.
In a neuroscientific sense, yes. Your body often learns faster than your conscious mind does, and the VACC is where that body knowledge meets the decision-making process.
Okay, let's move from feeling to deciding. Because we don't just feel emotions for fun. We use them to navigate the world, and specifically, the social world. A dinner party, as you said.
This is where we enter the realm of the social computer. For this, we're looking at a key paper by Lockwood and Whitman from 2018. It's in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, and it's called Ventral Anterior Cingulate Cortex and Social Decision-Making.
This paper talks about computational modeling, which sounds very robotic for a social, emotional part of the brain.
It does, but the brain is a computer in this sense. It processes information to make predictions. The core concept here is reinforcement learning theory, or RLT.
Break that down for us. What is RLT?
RLT suggests the brain learns by constantly calculating something called a prediction error, or PE. A prediction error is simply the difference between what you expected to happen and what actually happened.
Okay, simple example. I expect my coffee to be hot. I take a sip and it's ice cold.
That's a big prediction error. Your brain goes, whoops, update the model, this coffee is cold. Now, the DACC handles these kinds of errors for tasks, but Lockwood and Whitman argue that the VACC, specifically the subgenual ACC, the SGACC, tracks these errors when they involve other people.
A social prediction error.
Exactly. Imagine you tell a joke to a friend, you predict laughter. That's your model of the world. I am funny, they like me, this joke will land.
I expect a reward, a social reward.
You tell the joke, and they just stare at you. Or they frown.
Oof. Negative prediction error. A big one.
A massive negative social prediction error. Lockwood and Whitman state, and I quote, studies have begun to uncover the role of these two VACC regions, the SGACC and the gyrus in social decision-making, identifying a social prediction error. Your SGACC lights up to update your model of that friend. Okay, note to self, friend does not find that funny. Or maybe friend seems to be in a bad mood today.
So the SGACC is like a social scorekeeper. It's constantly adjusting my expectations of people based on how they react.
It is, and the paper makes a really granular, fascinating distinction here that shows just how specialized this area is. They differentiate between the gyrus and the sulcus.
A quick anatomy refresher. Gyrus is the hill, the fold, and the sulcus is the valley between the folds in the brain.
Correct. They cite a really important paper by Apps and his team from 2016 published in Neuron. The title is The Anterior Cingulate Gyrus and Social Cognition, Tracking the Motivation of Others.
So what did Apps find?
Apps found that the gyral ACC, the GACC, so the hill, specifically tracks information about other people.
The gyrus is for them.
And the sulcal ACC, the SACC, the valley, tracks information about self-reward.
The sulcus is for me.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? The gyrus signals the value of rewards for others. If I watch you win a prize, my GACC processes that. If I win a prize, my SAC processes that.
That is mind-blowing. The brain has separate hardware for your joy and my joy, and they're sitting literally millimeters apart from each other in the cingulate folds.
It's what allows for genuine empathy and what's called theory of mind. It allows us to model another person's mind without confusing it with our own. If those signals were all mixed up, I wouldn't know if I won the lottery or you did. That separation is crucial for any kind of complex social functioning.
Speaking of learning from others, can we learn just by watching? Or do we have to experience the prediction error ourselves to learn the lesson?
We can absolutely learn by watching, and the ACC is vital for it. This is observational learning. And for this, we are going back to that Burgos-Robles paper from 2019.
This is the one with the rodents, right?
Yes. Rodent models are essential here because we can trace the specific neural pathways. They found that the ACC is required for observational fear learning.
So one rat watches another rat get a little shock.
Exactly. The observer rat watches a demonstrator rat in distress. Now, the observer rat has never been shocked itself. But just by watching, the observer rat learns to be afraid of the cue that predicts the shock.
It learns from the other's pain. It basically downloads the trauma.
And the mechanism is very specific. It requires input from the basolateral amygdala directly to the ACC. The paper states, and this is a quote, corticoamygdala transfer of socially derived information gates observational learning.
So the fear signal from the amygdala has to reach the ACC.
It does. If you block that connection, the rat watches the other rat suffer and learns absolutely nothing.
That is dark, but incredibly important. It implies that if that VACC amygdala connection is severed, you lose the ability to learn from social consequences, from watching others.
You become socially blind to the danger signals that other people are giving off. You can see their distress, but it doesn't register as useful information you can use to guide your own behavior.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. We've been very focused on the ventral area, but we needed to find the boundary. Where does the feeling part stop and the doing part start?
This brings us to a really major theory in the field, the expected value of control, or EVC theory. This comes from Amitai Shenhav and his colleagues in a 2016 paper in Nature Neuroscience.
Right, Shenhav's work on effort. We've touched on this in previous deep dives.
It is. The EVC theory posits that the dorsal ACC, the neighbor upstairs, is a calculator. It constantly asks the question, is it worth the effort to focus hard on this task? It calculates the expected value of control.
Do I really need to pay attention to this boring spreadsheet right now, or can I just zone out?
Exactly. Is the reward at the end worth the mental energy I have to burn right now? But for any calculator to work, it needs data. It needs inputs.
And that's where the VACC comes in.
The ventral part provides the cost and benefit data for that calculation. The VACC tells the DACC, this is emotionally important, or this hurts, or this makes me happy.
When the DACC says, okay, message received, the emotional value is high, I will allocate the energy to fix it or pursue it.
Exactly. The VACC provides the emotional why, and the DACC provides the executive how.
There is another paper in our stack that refines this boundary even further. The Tour-to-Glue paper from 2020 on tenacity.
The tenacious brain. I love this paper. This is a fascinating distinction they make. Tour-to-Glue and her colleagues argue that the function of tenacity, the sheer will to persevere against resistance, is located in the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, or AMCC.
The AMCC, so we've ventral, dorsal, and now mid. The geography is getting complicated.
The AMCC sits right at the border, sort of between the emotional and cognitive zones, but the distinction is crucial for our definition of the VACC. They argue the AMCC is the engine of effort.
It's the muscle.
It's what keeps you going when you want to quit. It's the part of the brain that forces you to run that last mile of a marathon when every part of your body is screaming at you to stop.
And the VACC's role in that?
The VACC is the sensor, it's the fuel gauge, and it's also the pain sensor. It senses the emotional value and the physical pain. If the VACC says, this is hopeless, I'm sad, this is excruciating, and the AMCC isn't firing, you quit.
But if the VACC is screaming, this is painful, but the AMCC fires up anyway.
You persevere. The VACC feels the pain, but the AMCC pushes through it. This helps us really carve out the VACC's identity. It is not the muscle, it is the sensor. It tells the rest of the system what the emotional landscape looks like.
So what happens when the sensor breaks, or when it gets stuck on one signal?
That leads us directly into clinical dysfunction. What happens when the emotional accountant starts cooking the books or can't stop reading the same line in the ledger over and over?
We're talking about depression.
Specifically, treatment-resistant depression. For this, we have a paper by Policia and others from 2022. It's called 70 Years of Human Cingulate Cortex Stimulation.
70 years. Wow. So they've been zapping this part of the brain for a long, long time.
Since the mid-20th century, yes. What they found, and what has been confirmed by modern imaging like fMRI, is that the SAC, that subgenual part right under the knee, is consistently hyperactive in major depression.
It's overactive. That's counterintuitive.
I'm biased.
Underactive. I associate depression with a lack of feeling, with numbness.
It creates a numbness to the outside world, but internally, that specific circuit is screaming. It's as if the sadness button or the negative value button is stuck in the on and end position.
It's constantly generating negative prediction errors.
Constantly signaling emotional pain, yes. The accountant is screaming, we are bankrupt, everything is worthless, every second of every day, even when it's not true.
And the treatment then is what? To shut it up.
Ironically, yes, the treatment is deep brain stimulation, or DBS.
A pacemaker for the brain.
A good way to think of it. The paper notes, and I quote, deep brain stimulation, DBS, of the SACC ameliorates depressive symptoms in treatment-resistant major depressive disorder. They cite the pioneering work of Helen Mayberg here, who really spearheaded this.
And how does it work? By inhibiting this overactive region.
Yes. By applying a high-frequency current through a tiny implanted electrode, they can effectively jam the signal, they can quiet down that overactive region, and in some patients, the results are profound. It breaks the cycle of negative rumination. It stops the accountant from shouting bankruptcy when there is actually money in the bank.
That is incredible. And also a little scary. The idea that there's a literal switch for that kind of profound sadness.
It gets even stranger. The Policia paper brings up something called the valence lateralization hypothesis.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Lateralization means left versus right brain, right.
Yes. There is a debate, but it's supported by a lot of these stimulation studies, that the two sides of the cingulate process different types of emotion, different valences.
Don't tell me it's the old right brain creative, left brain logical myth.
No, not that pop psychology myth. This is much more specific to emotional valence. The hypothesis suggests the right hemisphere ACC is specialized for negative emotions: fear, sadness, withdrawal, avoidance.
And the left side.
The left hemisphere ACC is specialized for positive emotions: approach, engagement, happiness, reward.
So if you were to stimulate my right VACC, I might suddenly feel anxious or sad. And if you stimulate the left, I might feel good.
The evidence suggests exactly that. Stimulation of the anterior cingulate can elicit very different emotional responses depending on which side you stimulate. It suggests that our mood at any given moment might be the result of a kind of tug of war between the left and right cingulate.
We literally have a happy side and a sad side of our brain in a constant battle.
It's likely more complex, probably about approach versus withdrawal motivation, but yes, the lateralization is a strong signal in the data.
Before we wrap up the clinical side, we have to look at the other extreme. If depression is an overactive SACC feeling too much social and emotional pain, what about people who seem to feel no social pain at all? What about psychopathy?
For that, we go back to the Lockwood and Whitman paper from 2018.
The social prediction error paper.
Yes. They note that, quote, psychopathic traits are associated with disrupted social prediction errors in the gyrus of the ACC.
The gyrus. Wait, let me remember. The gyrus was the other tracker, right? The hill.
Exactly. Remember, the gyrus, the GACC, is supposed to track the value of rewards and outcomes for other people. In individuals with high psychopathic traits, that signal is blunted. It's disrupted.
So they can't update their model of how their actions affect others.
The social scorekeeper isn't recording the fouls. They do something hurtful, the other person cries or gets angry, and their GACC doesn't generate the prediction error. It doesn't register as a bad outcome to be avoided in the future.
It's not that they are evil in some abstract cartoon sense. It's that their VACC isn't logging the data properly. The feedback loop is broken.
It's a chillingly mechanical explanation for a profound lack of empathy. It really highlights that empathy isn't just a spirit or a choice. It is a computation, a biological process performed by the tissue in the ventral anterior cingulate cortex. If the hardware is disrupted, the software of empathy simply fails to run.
So what does this all mean? Let's try to bring it all together. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. It's a lot to take in.
We started at the knee of the brain, this little strip of tissue. We looked at the granular layers that act as a mixing board for the senses. We saw the rich club connections to the amygdala, the OFC, the hippocampus.
We saw the von Economo neurons, those superfast cells providing the high-speed internet for social intuition.
Then we established the VACC as the feeler, ventral, versus the doer, dorsal. We saw how it processes social pain in a way that feels very real, because to the brain, it is.
We looked at the social prediction errors, how the brain literally does math on smiles and frowns to learn how to navigate the social world, and how it can learn fear just by watching others suffer.
And finally, we looked at what happens when it breaks, the stuck sadness button of depression and the broken empathy tracker of psychopathy.
I think if you have to have one takeaway, it's that the VACC is the bridge. That's the synthesis. It connects the deep, ancient feeling systems like the limbic system and the amygdala with the modern executive doing systems like the motor and cognitive cortex.
It turns emotional value into social intelligence.
Perfectly put. Without it, we are either completely overwhelmed by emotion or we're completely cut off from it. We're robots.
It really is the translator between the heart and the mind.
I would agree with that description entirely.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone listening with a final thought, something to mull over.
Okay. I want to go back to that valence lateralization idea from the Pleacha paper we discussed.
The left positive, right negative idea.
Exactly. If the right side of our cingulate processes negative emotion and the left side processes positive, consider the implications for the future of neuromodulation. I mean, could we one day tune our personality or our resilience just by biasing one side of this tiny strip of cortex? If we could non-invasively dampen the right VACC and boost the left VACC, could we engineer a society that is biologically more optimistic, more resilient to trauma?
That sounds, on one hand, that sounds great. On the other, it's terrifying.
And if we did, would we still be us? Or are we actually defined by that struggle, by that constant tug of war between the two sides?
That is a question for another deep dive, perhaps.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the ventral anterior cingulate cortex. Just a reminder that while we quoted scientific papers from Vogt, Lockwood, Shenhav, Pleacha, and many others, this is for educational purposes.
Always check the primary sources for yourself.
We'll see you next time. Stay curious.